This session about environmental justice in Virginia. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Steve Fischbach. I'm the litigation director at the Virginia Poverty Law Center, which is the state support center for all the legal aid organizations in Virginia. So the way I thought we'd do this panel is first to allow the other panelists to introduce themselves. And then I'm going to just have a few opening remarks to sort of set the stage for the panelists, and then we'll have questions and answers. There is a chat feature that you can use to ask questions. I think the better way to do this is to take questions when we're done presenting, and I'll try to keep track of time so as to make sure that people's questions do get answered. Sound like a plan?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Excellent. So I'll call upon the panelists to introduce themselves, and that'll be the order of their presentation. So first, Muriel Branch, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Muriel Miller Branch, and I represent the AMMD Pine Grove Project, and I will be saying a little bit more about myself in the body of my presentation.
Great. Next, Gustavo.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, Steve. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Gustavo Angeles. I work for the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club, and I do environmental justice in the state. Thank you very much.
Great. And last, our non-Virginian, which we don't hold against her, Vernice.
My name is Vernice Miller Travis, and I reside in Prince George's County, Maryland. I'm a longtime environmental justice advocate and policy advocate, analyst. You know, I do a lot of different things. 35 years I've been working on these issues. I'm a co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice in New York. I'm originally from New York and started working and fighting around environmental racism and environmental justice issues there, and moved to Prince George's County in 1998 and have been here ever since. And my one claim to fame about Virginia is that my late husband's family was from Lawrenceville, Virginia. And the Travises, there's a street named for them, and most of their ancestors are buried in the old Poplar Mount Baptist Church cemetery, and he went to St. Paul's College, so we had strong ties to Virginia.
Great, thanks. So it's been a year and some months since we last gathered to talk about our work here in Virginia, and a lot has happened since that time. Most of it pretty darn phenomenal. So you may recall that on last year's panel, we had a couple of Boweries from Union Hill, where a compressor station was trying to be sited by Dominion Energy. You may already know this, but they won in a landmark decision issued by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The court invalidated the air permit that was awarded by our state's air board in an opinion that probably is one of the best environmental justice court decisions on record. In addition to that, I mean, that decision came out last January. In addition to that, our legislature moved from Republican control to Democrat control for the first time in a generation. So the stars were beginning to align to be able to do some pretty impressive work here, which you will hear about. So the way that we're going to sequence this panel is first we'll hear from Muriel, because she's dealing with one of our current EJ problems, of which there are many here, but we chose to feature her work. Then we're going to hear from Gustavo to speak about the legislative successes that occurred in the last year. And lastly, we're going to hear from Vernice. Also, since our last panel, DEQ engaged Vernice and her in the firm she used to work with, Skio, to do a report about how DEQ could develop an environmental justice program. So that too happened since our last panel. So without further ado, let me turn the panel over to Muriel. Muriel, I'm going to put your presentation on the screen so that everyone can see it, and just tell me next slide as appropriate, okay?
Great.
Can everyone see?
Yes.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. As stated before, I'm Muriel Miller Branch, founder and president of the AMMD Pine Grove Project. Many thanks to Steve Fischbach for inviting me to participate on this prestigious 6th annual University of Maryland EJ Symposium panel. And also to the esteemed panelists for graciously giving me the lion's share of the time on this panel. It's wonderful to have this platform on which to bring attention to the struggles of my rural Black community, whose historical and environmental resources are being threatened by a corporate polluter, Green Ridge Recycling Disposal, LLC. Please know that my community is by no means an anomaly. It is not alone in the fight for the soul and the survival of our communities. So today, I'd like to lift up my sister communities in the Commonwealth of Virginia, who are similarly situated. Brown Grove in Ashland, Union Hill in Buckingham, the C5 in Charles City, Petersburg, Portsmouth, and numerous others. Fighting for justice is not new to me. I've been active in the social racial justice movement since I was 17 years old. And in the words of the famous Black gospel song, I don't feel no ways tired. I've come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me the road would be easy. He brought me too far to leave me. While a student at the historically Black land-grant Virginia State College in Petersburg, Virginia, from 1960 to 1964, I participated in weekly marches, sit-ins, organizing events, and student-led initiatives for social justice. I was taught by the best to be a resistor during the nonviolent movement. Dr. Abernathy, Dr. King, and other civil rights leaders visited many HBCU campuses, such as ours, to help train an army of nonviolent resistors to use our bodies, our minds, and our voices to courageously confront the evils of injustice with dignity, silence, love, and persistence. I never stopped fighting because the struggles never stopped. I am a mother, grandmother, surrogate mother, auntie, and mentor. I'm a retired educator, an ordained minister, a published author, and a frustrated storyteller. All of these life experiences have brought me to this place to stand on yet another stage, environmental justice, which I see as intrinsically linked to racial justice. That's where AMMD Pine Grove Project comes in and is the basis for my presentation today, drawing on the intersectionality between environmental justice and racial justice. A dump next door, where history and environment converge, and I might add, to fight injustice. The basis of our fight right now is a mega landfill, which threatens the historic Pine Grove Rosenwald School and community. And I'd like to tell you in this brief presentation what we are doing about it. Next slide. Our mission, the mission of the AMMD Pine Grove Project is preserving history, expanding community. This project seeks to protect and preserve the legacy of the rural Pine Grove School and the African American community it served for decades, sowing seeds of greatness for generations to harvest. There are two intersectionality pieces here, and one to protect and preserve the historical integrity of Pine Grove School and the community which built and sustained it, and to protect the environmental integrity of Pine Grove School and the community from the proposed landfill adjacent to the historic school and in the heart of the Pine Grove community. Next slide. The little school that could. The AMMD Pine Grove Project grew out of the AMMD Family Association, which is an acronym for Agee, Miller, Mayo, Dungy surnames. In late 2018, the family learned that the historic Pine Grove School, which generations of family and neighbors attended, was going to be auctioned for delinquent taxes. The loss of such a significant piece of community history was more than I could bear. So I sprang into action. I called, wrote, and emailed family members and close friends to contribute to raising the necessary funds. Within a week, we had raised enough money to pay the delinquent taxes and the taxes due the following month. Pine Grove School was built in 1617 by Black residents for Black children in segregated Cumberland County, Virginia. The 4 acres of land, which was one of the requirements for receiving matching funds from the Rosenwald Foundation Fund, was given to Cumberland County by 2 Black residents, William and Olivia Miller. Pine Grove opened its doors to students in the fall of 1917 and continued to educate Black children in segregated Cumberland until 1964, when schools were finally desegregated. The photo on the left of the school on your screen was created by Stephen Metz. It's a visual of the 5-mile radius of the community, so designated because students had to walk up to 5 miles to attend Pine Grove School. I walked 3.5 miles. AMMD Pine Grove Project, under the advisement and with the help of co-authoring the PIF of Dr. Lakshmi Ford, applied for Rural Historic School District designation in July of this year. I'm disappointed to report that our application did not receive consideration because our approach to this study did not include resources from our antebellum past. But in all fairness to DHR, we're told that because of the nature of our proposal and the uniqueness of using only resources left on the cultural landscape, which were built by and used by freedmen and women, further study is underway. We expect that our application and that of our sister community, Muriel, will shift the paradigm away from considering structures to the people who populated them, who lived, worked, were educated, and worshiped in that community, that DHR and other evaluating agencies will take a look at the cultural landscape rather than a building, and that they will finally place the same value on Black history and indigenous history as they place on Caucasian history. The Pine Grove community was built by freedmen as a nadir of American history. As Black laws, Jim Crow laws were being enacted throughout the Commonwealth to strip Black and indigenous peoples of our rights. But our ancestors persisted. They built a strong, thriving community in spite of the racial restrictions they endured. Next slide. Educating community is a cultural legacy. Education is paramount to our community, and it is important that we keep the legacy alive. So it has fallen to my generation and generations under me to carry on the future of educating the public about the history of the Pine Grove community, but also about the economic and environmental threats which threaten its very existence and the community's right to live in an environmentally safe place. We use Pine Grove School as an organizing site because so many Black people in the community have a special attachment to the school. And thanks to Gustavo Angeles, we began holding meetings to educate the public about the dual threats to our historic, cultural, and environmental legacies as a Black farming community. And I might add, which really began in the 1880s. Our aim has always been to engage former students, community members, and advocates to join the fight to save our history and environment by giving them the information they need to engage in the fight. To that end, we've sponsored canvassing to get to know the demographics of the community and to get to know our neighbors. Monthly meetings hosted at the school, chat and chew listening sessions where we listen to former students. We've conducted some oral history sessions, May Day reenactments, cleanup campaigns, unofficial tours, media interviews, and a plethora of other events to bring attention to the rich history of the Pine Grove School and community. Next slide. Another, Pine Grove is elevated by historic preservation. Another very successful weapon Pine Grove Project has employed to elevate the threat of our community by Greenridge from the Greenridge landfill has been historic preservation. We owe a great deal of debt to organizations such as Preservation Virginia, who placed Pine Grove and the community on the 2020 most endangered sites in Virginia, but also to Virginia Humanities and the Department of Historic Resources for their assistance and their push to apply for historic landmark status. Receiving state and national historic designations for Pine Grove has brought heightened visibility to the school and the community. and has jump-started the investigations into federal regulations which protect historic sites. In addition, the newly enacted Virginia Environmental Justice Law, which puts responsibility on the various regulatory agencies to consider EJ impacts on the community, such as Pine Grove, has given AMMD Pine Grove Project more ammunition for this very significant battle. At the very least, the convergence of these laws and regulations will delay the permitting of the landfill. Hopefully, the delays, coupled with the economic feasibility and bad PR, will be so great that Green Ridge, who thought it was coming into a voiceless, poor community, will rethink putting a mega landfill in our backyard. They underestimated the strong push back from the community and its allies, and realized, I think, that they may have miscalculated. We are not people who will just roll over and play dead. Next. We're trying to keep a ubiquitous presence because we believe that activism is the key. We're determined to be seen and heard. And from the first hearing at the Cumberland County Planning Board in June 2018, and subsequent hearings at the County Board of Supervisors, we've been present. We've been present, we've been loud, we've been relentless in our questions and our opposition. One of our first questions was whether or not a study had been done to see if African-American grave sites were present on the dump site. Crickets. But we later learned that the question had indeed probably sparked an archaeological study. Wouldn't you know, though, that the study was conducted without speaking to one Black resident of the community? It's my understanding they had one informant, a white guy, new to the community. Their sole informant. Imagine that. And they expect us in the Black community to accept their findings when they didn't even value us enough to ask us anything, to get our opinion. We're the ones who know that community. We've been there since 1888. Next. Oh, some of the ways we have, I'm sorry. Let me go back, Steve. Can you go back?
Yep.
Thank you. We've sponsored community events. We have participated in conferences, the Rosenwald Network conferences and others. We've been visible at hearings, both on the state and the local level. We're good. We've gotten really good at letter writing, networking with other organizations with similar missions. We've been very lucky, not lucky, but kind of, it's been great to have that media coverage. We've gotten good media coverage on the different health aspects of a landfill and just pushback. The op-eds, the latest one was by Dr. Gurley which was a biting out op-ed in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. We now have a presence on social media, and our website was just launched last month. And of course, we are continuing to participate in the webinars and symposiums. You can visit our website at www.ammdpinegroveproject.com. Please visit us. Next. There is always, as you are well aware, continued fights. You know, there's these battles, but the victory is not here yet. So the latest threat, of course, is, well, the latest place we are in this process, I might say, is we learned that the Army Corps of Engineers public comment period on Green Ridge recycling and disposal will be held. The AMMD Pine Grove project has made great strides in it since its inception in 2018. But of course, new challenges emerge with each small victory. That open comment period expires on the 21st of this month. So we need your help. Next slide. The dump next door, public comment bullet points. We'd like for you to share your concerns about the Green Ridge mega landfill. And we're very grateful to the UVA Law Clinic, especially Ashley Ridgway and Christian James, and the Southern Poverty Law Center for creating an easy to follow bullet points. And they created them so that lay people can have their voices heard. The community members, because they're not in the trenches every day, but their voices are as valuable, if not more valuable, as anyone, because they live in that community. The U.S. Corps of Engineers has opened a public comment period to hear our concerns. Now, this public comment period is triggered by federal and state permit requirements related to impacts from the landfill to waters and wetlands associated with Muddy Creek. And anybody on this call, this symposium right now, who grew up in the community know that we called it Pine Grove Creek. But it is a tributary to the James River, and the permit would require, under the Clean Water Act and the Virginia state law, that these things be considered. But the Corps is looking at more than just clean air and wetlands impacts. Regulators must also determine whether the project is in the public interest. And here are just 4 of them, well, actually 5 of the issues that the Corps must include. 1, harms to historic and cultural resources. 2, noise and air pollution impacts. 3, fish and wildlife values. 4, general environmental concerns. And the needs and welfare of the people. The courts will also consider the need for a landfill, whether there are reasonable alternatives to the Green Ridge proposal. Next slide. So here they are again. What you might say or what you might address in your comments. Request an extension of the 30-day comment period. That would certainly give us time to get more comments in and to research particular regulations and statutes that would enable us to support our comments. Request a public hearing in the community. We know that that may be a little tricky now with COVID, but if we look beyond COVID to a time when we can indeed gather, I think that is a necessary piece of this before making decisions. They need to hear from the community. And if COVID delays it, so be it. But I think we need to push for that. The third thing is to request an environmental impact statement or an EIS. Now, the Corps has signaled that that is not critical, that may not be needed, but we vehemently disagree with them, and we are going to insist that they consider doing that environmental impact study. It is important that they look deeply into the cultural impact, the impact on the existing cultural resources in the county, in the community. And then number 4, ask for an evaluation of environmental justice concerns. Looking at the history of that community, when we did the PIF, when we prepared the PIF, we found 56 existing Black cultural historic resources on the landscape. And we want those things considered. We have 10 cemeteries, homes, some built as early as 1888. My grandfather, John Miller's, the home is not there, but the landscape is still there. The home was destroyed in a fire. 1897. Another uncle, home is still standing. 1893, 1920, 1905. These resources, even though they're in varying degrees of disrepair, decay, we know why. We know exactly why they are in the condition they are in. If you are a farmer and you have the only cash crop, your allotment for your tobacco crop cut in half just because you're a small Black farmer, how do you expect to feed your family? How do you expect your family to be sustained? And so that institutional racism, economic racism, political racism has infiltrated this community and absolutely caused it to shrink and decay. And so I am passionate about saving what's left. And the way we can do that is to just fight until we can't fight anymore. To see that this little community built during the nadir of American history, when Jim Crow laws and Black laws were enacted to keep us down. Yet they persisted. And we want to be able to look on this community and use both the school and the community on a civil rights tour. Make it come alive again. Bring my community, our community, back to life and make it viable. A place where people can live without having to worry about pollution, because this is a farming community and it is pristine. We don't need a landfill that we can see for miles away, stinking up our place, because you can literally smell the pine needles in this community. You can smell the earth. And we don't want to have our community destroyed. We want to build our community. Next slide. Sorry I took so long on that one. If you're interested, last but not least, ask that a Clean Water Act permit be denied. Bottom line. How to submit? Submit your comments on this project. Comments on this project should be in writing and can be sent by either email to Stephen A. Vanderblog at usace.army.mil, or by regular mail addressed to the Norfolk District Corps of Engineers, attention CENAO WR-R, 9100 Arboretum Parkway, Suite 235, Richmond, Virginia, 23235. Comments must be received by the close of business day on October 21st, 2020. If you need me to repeat that, I will. So for those of you who are listening in and not part of the visual Zoom, I'll repeat it again. Submit comments on this project should be in writing and can be sent to Stephen, STEVEN, dot A as in Apple, dot Vanderblog, BANDERPLOEG, at usace.army.mil. We have one more slide. All right. This is how we can be contacted, and we welcome your presence in our organization. We welcome you. It's critical that we band together. We would love to hear from you. We need the encouragement, as every grassroots group does. So join AMMD Pine Grove Project. We'd love to hear from you on any EJ or historic preservation resources we might tap into, or just encourage us. Remember, Pine Grove School and Community is not a one-off. It is critical that we band together to fight injustices of all stripes. And I'm reminded of the African folk tale entitled The Bundle of Sticks. And the moral of that folk tale is that there is strength in numbers. One stick can be easily broken, but when the sticks are bound together, it's much harder to break them. That's Pine Grove. We are bound together for the common good, and we draw on the strengths of our partners and allies who have joined our bundle. Thank you again for listening and attending, and I hope I've said something that we can move forward on. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. We gave Muriel this time because the story is so compelling, and we do invite you to submit comments to try to stop this egregious project from going forward. Next, why don't we hear from Gustavo? I don't know if you needed any slides run or anything, or are you good to go?
No, thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity. Before I start, I want to reiterate, please submit your comments to the Army Corps. They're due on the 21st. We would really appreciate if you could submit comments to request the environmental impact statement from them and all the other reasons that Muriel expressed on her presentation. Briefly, I'm going to talk about the legislation that earlier this year we passed with the help of environmental justice advocates and other groups here in Virginia, working together with the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative also. I want to remind everybody that this legislation, even though the political climate at the legislature, because of the change from political parties, was more, it helped us. It didn't mean that the advocates and other groups had to do a lot of work to make this pass. I want to also say that Virginia is being ranked #1 for business, not for their communities, okay? And that's for a reason. And I'm going to start elaborating a little bit, but first, let me give you a brief summary of the things I'm going to talk today. First, I'm going to talk about the Environmental Justice Act. After that, I'm going to talk about the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice. After that, I'm going to talk about the Environmental Justice Interagency Work Group. And after that, I'm gonna mention that the environmental justice is being added to the Department of DEQ as a purpose of the agency. And also I'm gonna talk about another law that we passed to extend the comment period and notifications for some of the permits. And finally, I will do a brief mention of the environmental justice study that the Office of DEQ requests earlier this year. So going back to the Environmental Justice Act, right now, this law requires, and is the policy of the Commonwealth to promote environmental justice and ensure that it's carried out through the Commonwealth with a focus on environmental justice communities and fence-line communities. Through this law, we add several concepts, definitions to the code that they were not there before. I'm gonna elaborate in a few of them. The first one is gonna be communities of color, which we specify that it has to be a means of any geographical distinct area, self-identification of communities. And also another caveat that we put there is that local populations expressed as a percentage of the total population of such an area. When it's higher than the population of color in the Commonwealth expressed as a percentage of the total population in the Commonwealth, to prevent that they will say, oh, there is not enough representation of this particular population when you withdraw it from in a larger area. That's why those specific definitions and under communities of color were added. Also under environment, we specify that we want the natural, cultural, social, and economic and political assets of components of a community. And the other term that we add that I want to elaborate is the fence-like community, which means an area that contains all or part of a low-income community or communities of color, and that present an increased health risk to its residents due to the proximity of a major source of pollution. Other terms that we add under the Environmental Justice Act are environmental justice, fair treatment, low-income community, meaningful involvement, population of color, and also the other term is an EJ community, which the difference here that we add is that it has to include populations of faith or disability. I wanna elaborate also and say that, show you how this Environmental Justice Act was passed. The administration was not really pushing forward for this kind of law. They want to add terms as realistically an opportunity to participate instead of just have an opportunity to participate, which it creates doubt when you start implementing this law. The next one that I'm gonna discuss is the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice, which it already exists through an executive order from the governor, but now is on the code. This is an important difference. It was established first by the previous governor when he was in the last month of his period, and it was executed by this governor, but the first iteration of this council expired, and the governor extended another executive order, making it happening again for another year. So, and now last year we managed to put it on the code, which allow us to have something that will last and it won't be there only for 1 year. And these are the difference. You know, sometimes you will hear that Virginia is leading on environmental justice, and this is not the case, because if the governor wants to have this on the code, he would have proposed it on the first year when he took the power. Not is being proposed right now on the third year by the different advocates.
They're not really made of lead anymore.
I would like to continue and let people know that we are going to talk about the Environmental Justice Interagency Working Group, which is something that we create to assess of all the government, create an assessment of all the government agencies and apply process to all the agencies. The purpose of this interagency working group is to implement the policy of the Environmental Justice Act. In order to do that, they have to create a report and they have to go back later this year in December with the report and propose it to the legislature. So in the next year, 2021, we can see some results, how this is going to be implemented and how much it's going to cost. I want to mention also that through another bill, we were able to add on the definition of DEQ that environmental justice is a purpose of DEQ now. And they have to further do environmental justice and enhance the participation in the regulatory process. And this is one of the parts that I want to elaborate how the administration was trying to push and change these concepts of environmental justice. And they want to add something that we were able to strike off. Was the administration want to put the department will strive for environmental justice. And they want to use that word strive. It's not like they want to do it. They just want to strive for it. With the fight of different advocates, we were able to take off that term because we don't need a department that's striving for environmental justice. We need a department that will do it. Finally, I want to talk about the extending comment period that and notifications that we were able to pass. Unfortunately, instead of having it for all the permitting process at the agency, we were able to only pass it for new fossil fuel generating facilities with a capacity of 500 megawatts or more. And the last item that I want to elaborate is about the environmental justice study that the department requested earlier in April after the session, when the session was ending, right? For something that people at the Department of DEQ was calling it environmental justice, the new thing. And this is how it's been referred here. Like this is a new term or is something that nobody have heard any time before. Just to give you an idea of what they were saying is that when they advertise this study and the RFPs for this studies, they indicate that the research will be conducted to identify options and recommendations for DEQ in order to develop a strategic approach to focus on environmental justice issues. And the director, David Paylor, mentioned that in accordance with their mission statement, DEQ will develop a clear process for incorporating environmental justice principles into our strategic planning and program implementation. With this rationale, to me means that DEQ is saying, we don't know how to do environmental justice. But meanwhile, we keep giving permits away, as it happened already for some gas power plants facilities. And also, as you can see, the state is continue doing business as usual through these permits that are trying to do, like the case that Muriel mentioned, right? In rural communities where there is the internet connections are not reliable, the phone service is not reliable, and they have to submit their comments over the internet because nobody got notified. To get notified, you have to be able to get to the web page of the Army Corps in this case, or you have to get to the web page of DEQ. And this is how DEQ proceeds, because they keep having meetings for these boards through the internet and giving permits away. I will say thank you very much for the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Thank you very much.
Okay, and lastly, Vernice, I know you can get it done, so go for it.
How much? Well, yeah. 10
Do
minutes.
your best, and let us go as long as we can, conference organizers, if possible.
We want to make sure we have time for some question and answer, right? So I want to start by thanking the two previous presenters. You both were great, but Miss Muriel, you really, that was a university level course you just taught there, and a graduate level at that. I really appreciate it as an urban planner. Everything you talked about is such a deep part of environmental justice that hardly ever gets lifted up, the value and role of historic and cultural preservation, right? And we probably could win a few more battles if people studied better the National Historic Preservation Act, which is a real tool in our toolbox that we don't use a lot. But I want to step back for a minute, and after listening to you all, after listening to the various panels throughout the conference for these past 4 Saturdays, yes, and next year we will not be doing 4 consecutive Saturdays as a member of the planning committee, I can promise you that. Though they have been great, but one thing that has really resonated with me is the sense that Dr. Wilson and the Center for Health and Environmental Justice at the University of Maryland School of Public Health has given us something that we didn't necessarily have before these conferences and before he got here, which was a real visceral understanding of what it means to be a part of the DMV, right? That DC, Maryland, and Virginia really have an identity that's interlocked. Our families and our histories are usually interlocked, our cultural practices, you know, everything about this place connects us, but we didn't act accordingly until Dr. Wilson got here and said, what's wrong with you all? You know, you have all these resources, all these communities, all these people, the federal government, but you don't work together to figure out what you can do to lift up communities. And so I want to thank Dr. Wilson and his students going back over the 6 years that he's been here for really being that glue that has made us link up to each other even more strongly. But that also includes the Delmarva Peninsula. So people talk about the Delmarva and they don't really understand what it means. Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, right? Including the District of Columbia. But we have a lot of brothers and sisters who are throwing down in Delaware as well, who come to this conference, who were here last year, who presented last year. And I just want to say that for our region, that often gets overlooked in the overall environmental justice battle, we have a lot going on. And again, I just want to thank the University of Maryland for putting a spotlight on the communities that are here and those of us who can be able to step up and support those communities in their struggles. It has made a huge difference. I also want to say that as I talk about this study, I want to say something about the political space that's been created over the last several years. So I serve on the board of an organization called Clean Water Action. And I mostly serve on that board because of the extraordinary mobilization and work that organizers, door-to-door campaigners and canvassers have been doing here in the state of Maryland around environmental issues, but particularly around clean water issues. And our previous regional director is a guy named Andy Fellows. Andy was also the mayor of College Park, Maryland. But he also served on the Maryland Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities with me as vice chair I was on that commission for 13 years, and Andy was probably on that commission for 15 of its 20 years. And as the Chesapeake Regional Director, Andy used to do a lot of organizing in Virginia. And I used to say to him, when I first moved here in the late 90s, I used to say, why? You know, there's so little that we have in common with those folks. And Andy said, there's a lot of environmentalists in Virginia, and there are a lot of people who are connected to the land and connected to the Bay, and those are our people. And we have to mobilize, and one day they're going to be voting, you know, in ways that really affirm the things that we all treasure and value together. And I just really thought it was a waste of his time. But sure enough, the mobilizing that Clean Water Action has done in Virginia, that church and faith-based organizations have been doing, that New Virginia Majority has been doing, that the Black PAC has been doing, the League of Conservation Voters, again, Clean Water Action, the NAACP, both the Virginia state chapter, local branches, and the national NAACP, the Movement for Black Lives, CASA in Action, all of these people have been mobilizing for a number of years. The fact that Virginia is a blue state now is not an accident, right? It's because people were doing strategic mobilization. Some have been doing it for a really long time, like the faith community, like the NAACP for a really long time, and others were more recent to the fight, but the fight was worth waging. And at the waging of that fight turned Virginia into a blue state, both in the 2008 presidential election, in the 2012 presidential election, and the 2017 midterm elections. And now we see that with a Democratic governor and a majority Democratic legislature, and all kinds of people on fire about the electoral process across Virginia, it has created a space for a lot of work to get done. Not the least of which was the passage of the Virginia Environmental Justice Act. I think also we'd have to say that there was some influence by the mobilization that went on in Virginia for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals decision in the Friends of Buckingham County case. Never seen a decision like that before in my life out of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, ever, 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 ever. You would have thought it was the Ninth Circuit out of California. It's an extraordinary opinion, and I really suggest that people read it to understand that the message about environmental justice is really beginning to ring loud and clear across the state of Virginia. And it has created some opportunity. And Gustavo talked about a lot of the challenges that are out there. But one opportunity, and he talked about this as well, is this Virginia EJ study, which we were privileged, both SCIO and Metropolitan Group where I work. SCIO is a Charlottesville-based environmental consulting company that I used to work for 9 years, and now I'm Executive Vice President at the Metropolitan Group working out of the DC office. And we won the RFP. And on October 15th of last year of 2019, we had our first meeting with the leadership team of Virginia DEQ to talk about the issues of environmental justice, what the challenges were that the agency was trying to meet, what they needed, and what we can do. And I'll just share with you one anecdote from the conversation. And Gustavo talked about this as well. So if you know me, you know that I'm a very plain-spoken person. I'm a very forthright person. And I also don't have a poker face, right? So whatever I'm feeling, I'm like, Kamala Harris. Whatever I'm feeling, it's on my face, right? So in the meeting, somebody says to me, so Vernice, we want you to help us understand this new issue of environmental justice. And in my mind, I was processing at that time, does he mean new as of when we walked in here? Does he mean new as when they put the RFP out? Does he mean new as in the last few years? Or does he mean new as the work that I've been doing for 33 years? What, which part of new is he talking about? But what that indicated to me though, was that for some reason, there really had been a vacuum in the state of Virginia, at least at the state government level, and at the Attorney General's level, Office of the Attorney General's level, that there really had been a vacuum about this very dynamic conversation about environmental justice that had been going on not only across the country, but had been going on within the federal government, at least since 1990, at a very, very, very high level. And so how is it that Virginia was not a part of that conversation? And I have to say that a part of that responsibility belongs with US EPA. And belongs with the US Department of Justice for not making sure that the state of Virginia was fully living up to its obligations to enforce all environmental laws, enforce what they could enforce of the executive order on environmental justice, but most importantly, making sure that they were vigorously enforcing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And if you know anything about Virginia, if you're not from Virginia or you're not from the DMV, you may not be aware that for a long period of Virginia's history, at least in the modern civil rights era, they've been in open revolt about whether or not they were going to comply with the Civil Rights Act. Now, things have gotten a lot better than they used to be. Fairfax County ain't shutting down its whole school district for 4 years and not sending people to school so they can't go to integrated schools after Brown versus Board of Education. We're a long way from that, right? But we're still in a place where people don't openly receive or openly understand what their requirements are that are not voluntary. these are mandatory things that people should be doing. So that was a real eye-opening conversation for me, which was the very first day we started working on this, is that not only did we have to create space for people to understand what these issues were and how they align with the mission of the agency and overall the charge from the governor to do this work, but to really teach and train people about what these issues are, what the tools are, and how those tools exist. They exist right now. There was also another really interesting conversation that went on about the understanding of what delegated authority means, right? So the Commonwealth of Virginia has a very unique process in that most other states understand that they have powers derived from the federal government because the federal government gives them those powers to implement federal law. And that's how almost every environmental law and regulation gets enforced around the country. That you sign something, every state usually signs something called a performance partnership agreement with a federal agency, and the federal agency transfers grant dollars to that state agency, and then the state agency uses that money to implement federal law. So to enforce the Clean Air Act, to enforce the Clean Water Act, to enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act, to enforce the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Claims and Liability Act, CERCLA or Superfund, to enforce RCRA, to enforce other hazardous waste laws, FIFRA, the Fungicide, Insecticide, and Rodenticide Act, right? How you regulate pesticides, and on and on and on and on. The whole universe of environmental regulations is enforced not mostly by the federal government, but mostly by state and tribal government and county and local government. And that's a thing called delegated authority. And we had the darndest time trying to navigate that understanding of delegated authority. So in Virginia, the agencies function mostly only when the state legislature tells them they must and they shall. So unless the state legislature has passed a bill or has passed a law, agencies in Virginia don't necessarily think that they have the power to move in that space unless the legislature of Virginia has given them expressly that power to do so, as passed by the legislature of Virginia and as signed by the governor of Virginia. So I say all of that to say that even though we thought we had broad purview to advance a lot of issues, it wasn't until the Virginia Environmental Justice Act got passed that the political space really opened to do deep work around this EJ study. So I'm not going to tell you everything that's in the study because Virginia DEQ is going to be, in the next couple of weeks, is going to be releasing this study to the public. But I want to talk to people about what the process was that led to the study and what some of the recommendations are and the sections that are in the study. And so first and foremost, we conducted 75 interviews with stakeholders across the state of Virginia, representing a wide array of stakeholder groups. So we talked to EJ groups, we talked to environmental groups, we talked to private sector, we talked to companies, we talked to local government, we talked to other state agencies, we talked to staff at Virginia DEQ. We tried to get as wide a panoply of representative stakeholders as we could to give a really broad assessment of what does the state need to do, where are the challenges, where do we need to clarify what the authorities are and what people need to be doing to advance environmental justice. Then after we collected all that data, we compiled it in a summary document, and we did a presentation on, I think it was June 17th of 2020. We had a webinar that 635 people participated in from across the state. And there was also a simultaneous Spanish webinar, a Spanish language webinar. Unfortunately, only about 5 or 6 people participated in the Spanish language webinar, but I was really glad to see that it happened. And I hope that that becomes a part and parcel of practice of community engagement that Virginia DEQ and other state agencies engage in, which is having information shared in multiple languages that people speak in the state of Virginia, right? Not just English only. And we shared with folks what had come from those interviews. And so that took about an hour. We did a webinar, we shared all of that. And We then had a survey. We gave people the opportunity to continue to respond to what they heard. If they didn't hear their particular primary concerns, to please get in touch with us, get in touch with the state agency, and even give even more information. And then we had a Q&A for an hour. And I want to say that this Q&A was rocking and rolling. At least I thought it was. It was a barn-burning, honest conversation where people asked the things that were really important to them. And it was Director Paler of the DEQ and I answering those questions. We were curating questions from the chat. We determined that we would take the most difficult questions out of the chat to answer. We didn't want to dodge things. We wanted to really have an open and honest conversation, and that's what we did. And my favorite question that came up from that chat was, when we had a conversation with the Friends of Buckingham County. So we did our interview with them. There were several people who were part of that conversation when we interviewed them. It was a group conversation. And one of the things that somebody raised with me is that they were really pissed that in the last hearing of the Air Board around the compressor station air permit, Virginia State troopers were present in the room and were particularly intimidating, but particularly to Black folks. And what was that about? And could we talk about that? Now, I didn't expect that question to come up, but it did. That probably was about 2 months after George Floyd was murdered. And we went deep and deep and deeper on the subject of the presence of police and the intimidating factor, and what is the role of that in an environmental hearing, right? And is that a necessary thing? And don't we need to look at that further in terms of how we go forward? And I just highlight that for you all to say that there was no subject that we did not try to respond to in that Q&A around the findings from the stakeholder interviews for the study. And then we took those interviews and all that we had gathered from folks, as well as we looked at reams of material that DEQ already had in its position. So I'm just scrolling through so I can tell you what we actually looked at. Hold on a second. During the information gathering phase of the study, the contractor team reviewed DEQ's statutory authority for advancing environmental justice and identified best practices for implementing environmental justice in other states. So we did a compendium of what are people doing around the country. We also conducted a range of stakeholder interviews, which I've described. We held the webinar in English and Spanish. And we did a statutory review of the best practices that are out there, but we also did a review of legal authorities. So where are the legal authorities within existing law, federal law, state law, et cetera? Where are the authorities to really move forward and address environmental justice at a statutory and regulatory level? And we did a really, really broad review of those things. And then we came forward with a series of recommendations, which are going to be released to the public in 2 weeks. So the report is structured. There's an introduction. We talk about the environmental justice study process. What is the process that we undertook to do the study? We lay out 9 sectors of recommendations. We talk about legal authorities and summary of legal authorities that enable and could further support the implementation of the recommendations of the study. We talk about state implementation examples. Again, what are other states doing? And then there's a conclusion. So I know I'm being kind of vague and I'm not giving you the meat of what's in the study, because that needs to come from Virginia DEQ and not from us as the contractors, but it is coming, and it is coming in its fullness. You will get the entire study will be available to everyone. You will have the ability to respond to that. And then you will have the ability to work with the state on how this gets implemented. But we hope, and it is my fervent hope, that we heard from the stakeholders, most especially the EJ communities on the ground who are struggling with issues. We hope that we honored the things that you are challenged with, and that we gave you some tools to be able to really get the agency to lean in, and not just DEQ, but all the agencies across Virginia to really lean in. And so the last thing I'll I'll leave you with is, I added this to, at Director Paler's request, I added this language to the introduction. It's important to acknowledge that many federal, state, and local government agencies have struggled to reconcile their agency mission with the principles and concepts of environmental justice. It has been particularly challenging to integrate the independent requirements of all recipients of federal financial assistance, especially those in the environmental, energy, and natural resource agencies, to enforce anti-discrimination goals in accordance with the mandates of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. For more than 30 years, this has been true for US EPA itself. Though much progress has been made, much more remains to be done to align environmental protection and civil rights enforcement. We address these issues in the Legal Authorities chapter of this report. And therein ends my presentation.
Great, thanks, Vernice. I know we don't have a lot of time left. Do people have questions? I have been watching the chat. I didn't see a lot.
Could we do a follow-up Zoom Q&A? I'm going to leave that to you all, but if that's something that you want to try and organize, I'm sure that we can. I believe, I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that Virginia DEQ is very much wanting to do that in itself, but that was not a part of the contract. That our contract was just to produce the study and the recommendations, et cetera. But we gave them an implementation strategy, a 2-year implementation strategy, but trying to find the resources to do this report out is something that I know that they are looking to do, but they very much want to have a public discussion where we go through, like we did with the findings from the interviews. So I know that is being considered, and it's in these tight budgetary times, trying to figure out how that gets done is going to be a challenge, though I might have to donate my services, and I'm happy to do that because I want folks to know where this landed. And all of this happened only because of what you all have been doing on the ground. There's no question in my mind that it's because of the mobilization that's been going on in the state of Virginia.
Well, worst comes to worst, if DEQ can't find the time, maybe we as the collaborative could do something.
That's a great idea. That would be a great thing for the collaborative to do, and maybe do it in partnership with DEQ, because you want the director there on the record.
That's true, we do.
And I'll just say to folks, I know that people have had, to say that they've had mixed relationships with DEQ is a gross understatement. I would just say this, that it was a true pleasure to work with David Paler on this process. He was a complete partner, shoulder to shoulder, every step of the way. And I know that that is not people's regular experience with him, but it was really a good experience to work with him on this document. And again, I think y'all created new political opportunity and new political space. And we're in a moment now where political will is meeting political opportunity, right? And so at a moment like this, you just got to kick the door in and keep it rolling, right? Because you don't know how long the door is going to stay open.
Hey, Steve, may I? Hello?
Yes?
Okay, yes. First of all, congratulations on all the leadership that the state of Virginia is showing with this EJ laws that we are implementing. And I wish there was a template that you could set up, because a lot of states are going to be needing this kind of infrastructure development. And hopefully y'all can set up something to allow other EJ communities in other states that are contemplating this to be able to embrace the way y'all do it, so we can utilize that to escalate this movement. I yield. Thank you.
And I thank you for that, Vince. And I just want to say that though the state of Maryland has had an Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities Commission for 20 years, I served on that commission for 13 years, there is virtually no activity. Richard Allen is on this session. Department of Natural Resources in Maryland is moving an agenda, but they are, and Virginia Maryland DOT are really the only two state agencies that have a program, that have a vigorous civil rights program. The rest of the state, I don't know what the hell they're doing. And I don't know what they've been doing, but I know they need to get focused like the state of Virginia has. And, you know, maybe the lesson here is that maybe if we were more mobilized on the ground, as you all have been in Virginia, maybe we would have more space to operate in Maryland. And this is a bipartisan statement. Under both Democratic and Republican governors, we have not seen significant progress on the environmental justice front in the state of Maryland. So now we can take a page out of the textbook of Virginia.
Great. So I think we're probably over time, if nothing else. I think I'm just going to wrap it up. I just want to thank everyone for their participation in this. I hope you found it helpful. Please, again, consider submitting comments on the application before the Army Corps. And stay tuned. We hope that in next year's panel, we have more victories, including Pine Grove, to be able to celebrate. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thanks for a great
Thank you for moderating a great panel.
And Miss Muriel?
Yes.
Graduate school, madam, graduate school course.
All right. Maybe we can make it happen.
I concur. Go, Muriel. Go. Well done.